Hello, and thank you for watching and listening. I really do appreciate it, and I was inspired to do this video because I was looking at the mini-series about the OJ Simpson trial. And this is a cover of OJ Simpson, and it says on there, and you can read it yourself, same thing, we the jury in the above entitled action find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder. What I thought was really inspiring about this whole thing was that this trial, I remember it as if it were yesterday. And I just read an article about the trial, and there were two articles. There were several articles, but this is one by the Huffington Post called OJ Simpson to be released from prison next year, which is this year, 2017, and it's in the blog spot. And so I thought that this was really interesting because I actually got a chance on Netflix. They had the 10-part miniseries. It's called The People versus OJ, and it's the American crime story. So I thought it was really interesting because it was like bringing back something that happened in history that was so pivotal, and I thought it was worth talking about because even to this day people still debate over whether or not he participated in the murder of Nicole and Ronald Goldman, Nicole Simpson and Ronald Goldman. So this whole thing I thought was interesting. So the next clip you're going to see is the cover. If you have Netflix, if you have you don't have to just have Netflix, but if you have any other, I believe if you have any other means of watching this, if you want to look it up, this is what the cover of it looks like. And the person that plays OJ Simpson is Cuba Gooding Jr. And he is the one that is to play. Now, from what I read, he wanted Denzel to play him, but Denzel was like, no. And two, I think for the age factor, because Cuba Gooding Jr. is more the age of what OJ Simpson was when he was pegged as being involved in the murders. So here, this was a time where black people in America are racially profiled. Black men are shown on television regularly as criminals. And black people, when they go in Korean shops and stores, they get followed a lot. And black people are always profiled wherever they go, and there's a lot of racial bias and a lot of tensions. And this is in the Los Angeles area in California. So I'm showing this clip here because I thought it was really important, especially with what is going on now in today's time in 2017. We already know that we've seen a lot of protest. There's been a lot of anger. Right now the issue is on Donald Trump election, and now he's been elected and he is the acting president, and all of the things that are going on, all the executive orders, all the laws that are coming out, and immigration is a big thing, and we still have the issue of race and racism in America here. So I wanted you to see this. This is called swirling. And so some people have a huge issue with black men, black women, if they date outside of their race. So they term it as the term called swirling. So you'll see a lot of videos, a lot of maybe books and things come up about people getting together who are of different races, especially when they're with African American persons. So this is OJ Simpson in his younger years. He was a famous football player. This is OJ Simpson with his wife, or former wife, Nicole Simpson. And this is the wife that he was accused in the trial of murdering. And a lot of times when these issues come up, they talk about the race card. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, that's the race card. You're pulling out the race card whenever there's a debate over people's nationality or wherever they come from, whether they're black or white, or if they're quote unquote what they call swirling, if you date outside of your nationality or your race. So that comes up a lot in these debates and these conversations. So during this time, this pivotal time, there was a show, and I don't know if it still comes on. It probably does still come on, and maybe in other maybe it has another title. But this show was really popular in the 80s and 90s. I say the 90s, probably the late 80s, the 90s. It was entitled Cops. So there were cops, and every time the show came on, it seemed like they showed a lot of people in neighborhoods that were not favorable, that were like urban neighborhoods, and it was always like black and Hispanic people being accosted or being profiled or being beaten by the police. And so there was this climate where the LAPD police officers would always target the black and Hispanic neighborhoods. And so you would see a lot of violence. You would get pulled over for things, asked questions that, for things that didn't even make sense. So there was a lot of tension in LA. So what followed in the year of 1992, there was a man by the name of Rodney King who was pulled over by the police. Now there's more to that story, but these 4 officers brutally attacked this African American fellow and beat him severely. Thereafter followed this live videotape brutal beating of police officers beating this man. There was a trial, and all 4 officers in the King beating were acquitted. Now, acquitted means they were released of charges. They didn't hold the officers accountable. Now, the next clip I'm going to show you is showing the face of the man that they had severely beaten. And you'll see where it almost looks like he's disfigured and his eye was probably almost beaten out of his head. And I'd like to apologize if it makes people feel uncomfortable, but I'm sure this is probably when he was in his healing stage, so it must have been a whole lot more worse than this photo that you're looking at. So there, shortly after, there was so much tension. In 1992, the Los Angeles riots were brewing. It was right to a point where it was what you call, like, if you have a pot on the stove and it's at its highest boiling point. Well, this is what Los Angeles was like. It was like a powder keg, and it just was ready to explode any moment during that time. So this was called what was known as the Rodney King riots in South Central of Los Angeles in 1992. So it was also coined as the LA or Los Angeles civil disturbance or civil unrest. So the clips that you're going to see that follow thereafter this is showing you a glimpse of where the whole riot stirred and began. It began at Florence and Normandy in Los Angeles. And what had happened thereafter, people who are Angelenos, people who were here during that time, can tell you all of their stories. And all of the stories coincide, but this is where that day just seemed to erupt in so much anger and so much I can't even begin. But as you know, from the way that I'm speaking, I was here. I saw, and I was here during the time, even before and even during and after it happened. And I even have my own accounts of some things that I saw. I saw people burning things, carrying gallons of gasoline that they had gotten from gas stations, and they shut down after, I guess, so many hours of seeing the eruption of violence. which really, it really, even before Florence and Normandy, you had like a group that started off to protest about the beating of Rodney King. And before the initial erupt of violence at Florence and Normandy had occurred, there were these people at the LA courthouse building. And from there on, the riots had ensued over at Florence and Normandy. It just kept going. And this riot lasted, I believe, maybe more than 3 to 4 to 5 days. And so this is what had happened during that time. So you're seeing like just glimpses. If you look on websites like YouTube and some of the other websites and look up the 1992 LA riots or the civil unrest of 1992 in LA, you will see clips of places, businesses that were burned down, maybe destroyed. This is a police officer, and he's probably, you know, trying to apprehend people who are inside, maybe looting. And you're going to also see where they had to put the city under like what they call it, martial law, where they have to send in like military people to keep the peace. And so there were like grocery stores here in LA that had like real military people with guns, and we almost felt as though we lived like in a war-torn country here. So it was pretty violent. I just say that nobody was following street signs. People were like backing cars and pickup trucks into businesses, and they were basically taking everything that they could find out of there, and then they would set the place afire. And so these are the Korean store owners. They had guns, and they were ready, and they were almost like they were military ready. And I believe from a friend I heard that in the Asian culture, some of the Asian people, males, have already kind of served in military, and so they're already kind of prepared for that type of event. But just know that if you go in a store and it's an Asian shopkeeper, that more than likely they have guns. And I would bet now probably everybody after that whole incident, but this was like at the closing of the event, of the several days of the burning and the looting and the people running in the streets and driving crazy everywhere, and there were fights. And that was what you just saw. It was Bill Clinton. He was looking at the whole scene of some of the damage, and there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of frustration, and people's minds were still fixated on this videotape, and it was constantly being showed, and you just never could get this scene out of your head. And you could never get this title. In the LA Times, you see all 4 in the King beating were acquitted. So I'm going to digress. During the time when there was the rioting going on, there were white people that, I guess, if they were going back and forth to work in the area. This is Reginald Denny. He was a truck driver. He was in the vicinity of Florence and Normandy, and some words were said, and him being white, there were African American males that pulled him out of the truck and commenced to beating him, because there was so much anger and there was so much violence and there was so much going on. It was right at the height. He pretty much was at the wrong place at the wrong time. He was right at the height of where all of the rioting was beginning to take place and unfold. So this is an article. This is showing Rodney King when he was still living. He's no longer anymore, and the 4 officers that were involved in the beating in his face. And that was the clip that you've seen. But the reason I'm doing this is because I almost feel like history repeats itself. So when I see, like the protests that are happening even now today with immigration, when I've seen protests with Freddie Gray, when I've seen protests based on Trayvon Martin's case, and when I've seen protests about other issues, it just seems like it just never ends. So here, this is sort of like the race card. It's something that whites invented to deny white privilege. And so there's that big question of white privilege. So I noticed that those debates come up, you know, pulling the race card out and everything like that. And sometimes they accuse black people of that, and other times they accuse white people. So it's like a pendulum that swings back and forth. It's back and forth fighting. So in showing this clip here, you see a liquor store. And what was happening back in the time of the 80s that I remember here in Los Angeles, as a Los Angelino, there were like liquor stores. It still to me seems like it's the same thing, but there were liquor stores on every corner, even before the riots. So after the riots had finally come to like a cease, there was sort of like this hush hush where everybody was like, you know, let's protest peacefully. Let's try to see if we can get some things resolved and rebuild South Central. And number one, they wanted to keep the peace with the gangs. There was a truce, a gang truce between the Crips and the Bloods, which I think that might have ended quickly. But there was also rebuilding South Central without liquor stores on every corner, because they felt like liquor stores were targeting poor and were targeting urban areas, and they were targeting blacks and Hispanics. Because they would always build, you know, and they would always have like almost every liquor store on every, would be on every corner here in Los Angeles. I'll just tell you, it still seems like it's the same thing. It's just they're a little more slyer with it. You know, you'll see a gas station, and then shortly thereafter there's a liquor store after the gas station. But here are the key actors in that TV series of OJ Simpson. So I thought that was interesting, and you see Cuba Gooding Jr., and then you see a whole host of the other actors, John Travolta, and the other actors that are involved in the movie. So I, you know, at the end of this video, I'll put in the name of the title of the movie. But this is OJ Simpson, how he looks now, and from what I've heard, he's supposed to be released this year, and so I thought it was interesting because this is the Bronco that he was in during the police chase. This is OJ in his younger years as T.D. Parker. So OJ Simpson has been in The Naked Gun. He's been in some movies. He's been on, before he got in all this trouble, before the trial and all this stuff had happened, OJ Simpson had I remember even as a little girl in the 70s, that he would go flying through the airport and he was running. He was like the black superhero. So this is OJ Simpson and Nicole Simpson and his children when they were still together as a couple. So the thing with OJ Simpson, where he comes into play after the 1992 riots, think about it. There was this black man, he gets beat up by these 4 white officers, they're all acquitted, and then there's this huge riot that ensues, that erupts in the whole city of LA, and now you got a black man, and he's accused of murdering his white wife, and her, what quote unquote could be a boyfriend. But if you look at these photos of OJ Simpson here, you'll see that there were problems with OJ in terms of the black community. They didn't receive him well because they felt like he distanced himself from the black community. And if you see him posed around people, nobody else is black except him. So this didn't sit well with black community people who, you know, they looked up to him at one time and point in their life. And then when this whole incident had unfolded, they were like, so now he comes back to the black community for a safe haven because now he's in a world of troubles because of the murders that he's been accused of. So being it so that we had the 92 riot and there's a lot of racial tension, as it seems like it still is, this case was racialized. That last woman you saw him with wasn't his wife. That was his girlfriend, Paula Barbary, I don't know how to pronounce the last name, Barbary, Paula Barbary. So after, I guess, him and Nicole had split up, he had a girlfriend, and I believe maybe Ronald Goldman might have been Nicole Simpson's boyfriend. But these are some of the real characters that are real live people that were involved in the OJ trial. And you see Johnny Cochran at the top. You see Judge Ito, and Johnny Cochran was a key figure. He's no longer living. You see the dates, but he was one of the key lawyers in the what was called the Dream Team for OJ Simpson. So moving along, you're going to see how this trial, it was the longest trial. It said that it was the longest trial, even longer than the Charles Manson. It was more sensationalized. And you see how the magazines, how they make people look, especially if they accuse you of a crime and if you're black. And I wanted to particularly focus on, just look at how they darkened his face, and how they made him look more sinister, and how they entitle it. It's important to look at that. You know, they didn't lighten his face, they didn't airbrush or do anything to make him look, who he really is then. It's more like they darkened everything to make him look more sinister and what have you, and they already pretty much tried and convicted him. So during this time, I thought it was important to bring out. So you see Johnny Cochran, you see OJ Simpson, you're going to see other clips, you're going to see OJ Simpson trying on the gloves. That was a big deal back then, because there was a phrase called, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So that was when the gloves, if they didn't fit, then he must have not have done it. So it was really bad. I'll say that. It was a long, drawn out process. There were a lot of witnesses. And so, let's see here. One of the titles of the article says, OJ Simpson to be released from prison next year, 2017. There is a mini-series currently being aired on FX Network Tuesday nights titled American Crime Story, The People vs. OJ Simpson, based largely on writer Jeffrey Toobin's superb book. I read it when it came out, The Run of His Life and The People vs. OJ Simpson. So that's one of the articles that I saw. It was from the Huffington Post by David McCary. And then, let's see. Okay. I was looking at a lot of little things because I thought it was interesting, because it's so pivotal in history, because some of the things that we're experiencing now, it just seems like a repeat. So the other thing is, I looked up something called Famous Trials by Professor Douglas O. Linder. The trial of Orenthal James Simpson, an account. And so it gives like a real in-depth account of the whole incident from beginning to finish. And it's sort of like briefs you and gets you up to speed on what had happened. So I will leave that title of that in there so you can kind of see. And you can also see how important race plays a part in these high-profile trials, such as the Trayvon Martin case with George Zimmerman, such as some of the other cases that have happened in the past, like the Freddie Gray case, and some of the other cases that you probably, maybe in the future, you're going to see. I just don't think it's ever going to really end, because it just seems like that's what the climate of America is always. It seems like there's always some kind of racial divide, and with this case, there was clearly a racial divide. Clearly. And there was a lot of, you had to choose a side. Either you believed he did it or he didn't. And then if you believed he did it, then, was there some kind of doubting? So there were some people who were down the middle. There was sort of like a wavering. You felt like, well, if he did do it, there had to have been somebody that maybe he hired, or there were more other people he had involved, or if he didn't do it, somebody else did it and they framed him. So there was a lot of things that came up. So you're just going to see a clip of Cato Kalin, and he made an account, a testimony of how he felt, and he even debunked the People versus OJ Simpson. So I'm not gonna go and read all of that stuff because it's a lot. It's pretty in depth. Maybe I will go over a little bit of stuff. I don't know, but you're gonna see. I'm like really focusing on the clips. You're gonna see more of. You're gonna see Shapiro, and you're gonna see OJ Simpson, Shapiro, which was one of the Dream Team participants, and Johnny Cochran again. Then you're going to see some other people that were involved in the trial as well. You're going to see even the reaction. You're going to see even the Kardashians' father, Robert Kardashian, and you're going to see Bailey, who was a lawyer in the trial. There are other people who were involved. Carl Douglas. He was a defendant on the defense attorney team for OJ Simpson. And then you're going to see, even the reaction of people. So I just thought I would just go in and say, whenever somebody tells you in America that race doesn't matter, and you hear this, I've heard this from people, and I don't listen to them. And I would tell you this honestly. It's not true. Race matters here in America. Even if you don't want to be a participant of all of the craziness that goes on in some of the debates, race seems to play a huge part here in America on every level, and even in these high profile cases like this. And in particularly this case of OJ Simpson, right after the 1992 riots, after that real climactic time of violence that had ensued in the LA area. And it was really crazy because you would think that people would be like, let's separate the two things, but you just couldn't. You just couldn't, because you're looking at, okay, these are two black men. And one situation, this guy, he's being beaten to death, and all four white officers get acquitted. The next one is a famous black ball player, and he's being accused of murdering his white wife. But there was a lot of questionable doubt of his character, because O.J. Simpson had also been involved in domestic abuse of his wife, and it also brought to the forefront about domestic violence in relationships. So that seemed to come out, and it was also a time where a lot of people felt like, well, why is it that when he was with his OJ, before he was married to Nicole Simpson, he was married to a black woman, and he was abusive. From what I had read, he was abusive with her, but nothing came out about domestic abuse. Nothing came out about domestic abuse until they had this incident with this huge trial and all of this stuff that went down. This is Marsha Clark and Mark Fuhrman. And Mark Fuhrman was a homicide detective. But let me go back. Nothing came out about domestic abuse until the big debate was, how is it that domestic abuse comes out when it's a white woman being murdered and beaten? And you have black women that get beaten and they get murdered, but domestic abuse doesn't come out. So this is Mark Fuhrman. He was a former homicide detective here, and he was a head of a department in Los Angeles. And so there was some real controversial tapes that came out about Mark Fuhrman. And so I think I will read that, because I think that that is an important piece here in this whole thing. And let me see here. I'm trying to close out some of the windows, because I have, so many windows open. So, because I had been looking up some other articles on these cases and things like that. So I thought it was really important to look all this stuff up, because I thought it was interesting. I find a lot of things like that interesting. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go to I'm just going to read this stuff about Mark Fuhrman because I thought it was really important. The trial begins. I'm kind of reading that article that I told you about. Okay, this is the one on Mark Fuhrman. LAPD officer who found a bloody glove outside of Kato Kalin's bedroom turned out to be a godsend for the defense corrupts police theory. The officer, Mark Fuhrman, testified for the prosecution on March 9 and 10. In his book about the trial, Robert Shapiro wrote, a suddenly charming Marcia Clark treated him like he was a poster boy for the apple pie and American values. 3 days later, F. Lee Bailey began a bullying cross-examination of Fuhrman in which he asked the detective whether, in the past 10 years, he had used the N-word. So Fuhrman, it turned out he was a lie about that whole incident. So it was said that he had planted a glove and he had probably contaminated the what would have been in the evidence, and so that's pretty much sabotaged the whole thing. So Mark Fuhrman, it turns out he had some tapes where he was supposedly caught calling black people a lot of names, you know, racially stereotyping people, and also had admittedly stated that he falsified people's you know, pretty much like, say, like when the police they racially profile people, and you know, they have to have some evidence. When you've seen movies where they plant drugs on a person or they do things to try to get people pretty much in trouble and thrown in jail. So this right here, you saw that shirt, it says no no justice and no peace. It's sort of like you know, how people try to deny that there's, like, you know, racial injustice, and a lot of times they, you know, you'll have some white people who are racist. They try to take a slogan and they coin it into something that is more about how their values are and their belief set. And you know, at one time they were saying, when Obama was elected, they were saying this is a post-racial environment. And right then and there, I knew differently, because I had lived through all of these things that had been happening even up to now. So I said, no, this is not post-racial. It's just getting started. It's something else is gonna happen. So this was the trial. During the time, it seemed like every time you turned on the TV, just like now, every time you turn on the news, you see something that Donald Trump this, Donald Trump that, you know, the Donald Trump cabinet. Well, the OJ trial was like that. It was televised and people were watching. So this is the slogan that says, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And so shortly thereafter, there was a verdict that OJ Simpson was found not guilty of the murder. Oh my goodness. Just like how when people heard that all 4 white officers were acquitted in the beating of Rodney King, when OJ Simpson was acquitted and they celebrated that, everywhere on TV there was this moan. You could hear some people that were crying and they were upset, and it was a huge reaction all over. It just seemed like there were people saying, he's a murderer, he did it. Let me just say this. Honestly, whites who were racist and whites, just, there were a lot of white people who were extremely angry. And they swore up and down they hated OJ. He did it. Famous Trials by Professor Douglas O. Linder. Okay, so I kind of put the titles in here because I didn't want to leave them out. So if I forget, but you know, like I say, people agree and disagree, and you say, okay, we can agree that we disagree. Let me tell you, when that case was over, it was just beginning. It was crazy. It was like Oh my gosh, it was like the world was on edge. It was divided. Everybody was watching the trial, and you had people who said he was guilty of murder. He was guilty. There are still people today who feel that OJ did it, and still people who are angry and bitter behind that whole thing. And so I wanted to say this, that I believe the reason, and I'm going to go a step further. See the reaction? See, this is when the verdict was read, and you see the black woman in the back where she's kind of like, I don't know, and then you see the other one, and yes, you would see a lot of black people who, some of them were saying, he didn't do it. He didn't do it. Now, mind you, this was during that time. Racial profiling had been going on. Rodney King event happened. 4 white officers were acquitted, and all that chaos had went on, and now this OJ trial and all this craziness. Okay, so OJ Simpson verdict. Those who agreed that he did it, and those who disagreed. Okay, so clearly you see here the OJ Simpson murder trial. It says live television coverage from the final days of OJ Simpson's murder trial in late September of 1995, including nearly 18 hours of closing arguments made by prosecutor Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. And there was a rumor about Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, that they were together and that there was something going on. They were conspiring, and that it was a swirling with the 2 lawyers. So this right here is where they're showing, presenting evidence of the grisly murder that took place, and the stabbings and what have you. This is Ronald Goldman. This is one of the persons that were murdered. This is Chris Darden right here, and the next lawyer you're gonna see, he's presenting the person in court who was murdered, one of the persons who was murdered, and he's doing his piece. And then you see Marcia Clark. So these 2 lawyers, they work together on the opposing team from the Dream Team. They were the ones who were trying to convict OJ Simpson for being guilty of the murders. And you're going to see a clip of Marcia Clark, and you're going to see Christopher Darden. And there's books on this whole trial and everything. Some people have probably already read it. And so there's Marcia Clark and then Christopher Darden. And so there had been a rumor going around that the 2 of them were together. And if you've seen I don't know if you've seen the series yet, but you'll even see it a part in the series where they were getting kind of close. So there's that, question, that big question mark, were they swirling? Now I'm bringing up that statement again, the swirling. So you're going to also see Marcia Clark right here, and she was going through a divorce during the time of the trial. So she had 2 in the series, they show her with 2 young sons, and she's working late hours. She's trying to work, and she has a babysitter, and she was going through some marital problems, so she was going through the divorce. And then you see Christopher Darden, you see his daughter, and this may not be a recent picture, but Janae Darden, I believe is her name. So this is Chris Darden. So she claims that her father didn't have any relationship with Marcia Clark, but everybody still has in their mind the question that what if, maybe, possibility. There even had been a rumor that they were seen coming out of hotels together. So I'll leave that up in the air. But this right here, these are incidences that have happened after, way after. This is the Stanford swimmer who raped the unconscious woman, who gets a short sentence. This is George Zimmerman. We know about the Trayvon Martin case. And then you're going to see how people, if you followed that case, you've seen how pivotal that was, and the reactions that came about after that case. And then you are also going to see that just because people are white doesn't mean that they agree with other white people. So, are people who look white. So here, this guy, he's clearly voicing his opinion. He said it's called a neighborhood watch. You do not use a gun to watch, which was the argument as to why people felt like George Zimmerman should have been um, jailed or put in prison for murdering Trayvon Martin. And this is another case, these two other cases, the Eric Garner case and the Michael Brown case, and which involves, once again, no justice, no peace, their crime, being a black man in America. And both incidences had to do with officers killing them. And then you're going to see protesters. This is what we're dealing with today. You know, diversity equals white genocide. You know, people still have these views. And this is not an old clip right here, you can tell. So this is what, you know, alt-right protesters actually is who these people are called. They're alt-right protesters. And so this is what is going on in the year 2016, 2017, after Donald Trump, like just before and after Donald Trump was elected. So none of this is a surprise or a shocker that is happening. I just want to alert some of those that there were things happening way before some of these cases and some of these things that you're seeing now. It just seems like it's a repeat, but it's like it was always there, really. It never went away. And there's anger. And so I believe the reason why, I'm going to say this, let me digress again. You see here, this protester, he's saying, God, guns, and guts made America great. Let's keep it all three. And Hillary in prison. Hillary to go to prison, 2016. So, and then he goes on to say, welcome home, veterans. And so, you know, so some people have some really strong opinions. And then you see the women chime in, keep your laws off my body. This is when Donald Trump's election and everything has taken place already. And then you're going to see stuff with Baltimore, Trayvon Martin, and then just other protests that follow thereafter. And so this is not anything that it should be a shocker. So, you know, there was an incident in Baltimore. So I wanted to say that I believe the reason why, you know, everybody's wondering why are these officers, when they kill a black male, that they seem to walk free, or they seem like they don't care, or they're being killed in the street. I really do feel like people that wanted to see OJ fry, and they were angry about him being able to get out, and they still think he may have killed Nicole Simpson. I feel like it's like what you call sensationalized lynch mob of black people today, and it's all over the media. And then you see this outpour of people here. It says this isn't over yet. This is about the Trayvon Martin protest after George Zimmerman was pretty much let go, and he was told that he wasn't guilty for the murder of Trayvon Martin. So I feel like people feel this is the protest, and I feel like people are still angry about that OJ Simpson case. Now, he's supposed to be released this summer of 2017. Hopefully he has some security, because I believe there's a lot of enemies out there for him as well. But this is justice for Freddie Gray, Black Lives Matter, you know. So I just thought that all this ties together. It really does. The only thing is that now we have Donald Trump as president, and now we have this issue. What I more recently heard is with Russia being in the mix, and immigration, and some of the other things that are pressing issues right now in today's time. And still we have issues surrounded with race and police killings, where this time police that we have in LA, is things happen, you're afraid, you don't want to get stopped, You feel as though the police are not working for you, or they're not really there to protect and serve. So there's a lot of like uneasiness, and blacks still feel like they can't trust police officers. Um, and this is the immigration thing, and Donald Trump, people protesting about that. So I just thought it was interesting. I just thought, and what are your feelings? Leave comments in the box. Do you think OJ did it? Or what? So without justice, there can be no peace. This was said by Martin Luther King. And being it so, this is February Black History Month, I thought it was important to bring some of these issues out since they are still going on today. It just seems like it's a revolving issue. And thanks for watching.